The viewport is a window into your game that lets you see what a player would see when playing your game. Knowing how to move around and interact with objects in your viewport is a fundamental skill when starting to develop an Unreal Engine. If you're new here, I'm Brandon, and in this video we're going to continue with our beginner tutorial series and go over the basics of navigating the viewport, manipulating objects in your viewport, and some tips along the way to help speed up your development. Let's get started. First, let's go over the basics of moving around. You can think of the viewport as your in-game camera. There are some key actions that will be your bread and butter when you move around your level. The scroll wheel allows you to zoom in and out. If you hold the right mouse button down, it's used to rotate your camera. And with the right mouse button down, you can press W, A, S, and D to move forward, back, left, and right. Q and E allow you to go down and up in place. This sort of combination makes it very similar to playing a first-person shooter. You can also use the arrow keys if you want, with no mouse button. The left mouse button is similar to the right mouse button when going left and right, but the left mouse button does not go up and down, so it keeps you on the same plane as you move around. You can also use the WASD keys, similarly to like how you use with the right mouse button. If you use Alt and then the left mouse button, you'll orbit. And then if you use the F key with an object selected, it'll snap your focus of the viewport to that object. This is very helpful for like if there's a large map, and let's say like we're all the way over here, and you know you want to go to this. And instead of using your keys to kind of go all the way over there, you can just hit F and it snaps to it. One thing you may have noticed when we moved out is the speed at which the camera moves around your level. This can be too fast or too slow, depending on how big your level is or the fine grain detail that you want to look at. At the top right here, you have your camera speed. You can modify this, and then it goes a lot faster, or goes a lot slower. So this can be very useful, depending on what you're planning to do at the time. Unreal Engine 5 also lets you switch between different camera views. By default, what you see is perspective mode, but you can also switch it to a top, front, or side orthographic view. So to do this, you click up here for perspective, and then you choose which orthographic view you want. So like as for this example, we'll do top. If you see this, by default it puts it in wireframe, but you can click the wireframe up here and change it to lit, and then now you're back to the original view that you saw before. So then this gives you your top-down view. So we'll go back to perspective view. Another useful thing is full screen. So you can make the viewport go full screen by hitting F11, and then you can put it back in windowed mode by hitting F11 again. This also works while you're actually playing the level. And those are the basics of moving around the level in your viewport. It's pretty easy, right? Next, let's go over some basics of interacting with the objects in your viewport. So in the last video, we went over object translate, which is what allows it to move on one of the axes. Rotate and scale. So let's go through and make this a little bit smoother. So knowing how these three things works is fundamental for manipulating your objects in the level. But having to come up here and select each individual one can be clunky. You can use the object shortcuts. So like W is how you select translate. You can use E to select rotate and R to do scale. Or something that I like to do that's easier is you can just press the spacebar and it'll cycle through them. This makes it a lot easier so then you don't have to actually remember 3 extra shortcuts, you just need to remember 1. Unreal also has snapping features. So up here on the right, you've got your translate snapping. rotation snapping, and your scale snapping. So what this does is this allows you to stick to a unit of measurement for each movement or each rotation or each scale increment that your object does. So that way you can make sure that it fits in a certain increment. So if these are highlighted, that means snapping is enabled. So like the easiest example is to do rotation. So if we select our object and we put it on rotation. So right now it's set to do 10-degree increments. So when you select it, you'll see it only moves in 10-degree increments. So then if I come down here and I change it to 45, it only moves in 45-degree increments. And if I turn it off, I can move it in any increment that I want. So another thing that I find very useful is duplicating objects. You can either use Control C and then Control V to duplicate. So like we can do this again and we click over here and it allows you to duplicate, or we'll use Control Z to undo. What I like to do is if you hold Alt while you're in the translation mode, with the object selected, hold Alt and then use an arrow and it'll duplicate it. So then you can release, press it again, and you can easily and quickly duplicate objects. So then we'll Control Z to undo that. Another useful thing is a shortcut that I like to use for making sure that objects are flat on the ground. So let's say we have this ramp. We make a duplicate, and let's say we want to make it sit on top of this, and you want it to be exactly on top of this box. So we can either go through here to try and eyeball it this way. And even then, it may not be exact. So to make this a lot easier and a lot faster, when your object's up in the air, all you do is you hit end on your keyboard and it'll automatically make it flush with whatever's underneath of it. Now when you're doing this, it will account for other objects. So like as an example, if we move this up here and we put this flat on there, even though this doesn't cover the whole bottom, it'll sit on top of this because it'll stop on the first object that it hits. So just something to keep in mind when you have like say an uneven terrain or landscape. So like we come over here on this slope, you can see it's not like it'll form down the slope, it'll just sit where the first point hits. As I mentioned earlier, there's undo and redo, which are both very useful tools, especially if you do something and you mess up by accident. Like, let's move this up here. If I didn't want to do that, Control Z will undo your action. And then if you do Control Y, it'll redo your action. So you can cycle between those two as needed. And the last tip for interacting with objects in your viewport is selecting multiple objects. So when you select an object, when you select something else, obviously it changes. So if you hold shift, you'll be able to select multiple objects. And then all of those, you can either move it once, you can do your rotations with them, you can scale them, and you can even duplicate. You can also use Control A to select everything. Typically this isn't very useful, but the option's there if you have a need for it. And that's it. Once you get the hang of these controls, you'll be flying through your project in no time. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Unreal Engine tutorials. What's the next Unreal Engine feature you want to learn? Let us know in the comments below. You can also check out this playlist for more beginner tutorials. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.